Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on community participation in EIA and EMMP monitoring. This session is hosted by Dr. Peter King and will last approximately 60 to 90 minutes. My name is Shosha Tewabarihantakun, and I'm going to be a moderator for today's session. We hope to cover the aspect of community monitoring during this webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to draw your attention to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, which will also have the chat box at the bottom. Please feel free to type in your questions as they come up. I will collect all of them and ask Peter to respond after his presentation. In addition, we will also have a live Q&A period at the end of the webinar. Please note that everyone will be muted during our session. Therefore, it's really important for you to select the raise hand button, which is the yellow hand symbol on your control panel. This will automatically notify us that you would like to speak. We will also be posting all Q&As and presentations after the webinar on the Mekong Citizen and AECEN website. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning everyone. As this is the first in a series of webinars on community participation in environmental impact assessment, it will be a bit of an experiment, and we apologise in advance for anything that doesn't go quite right, but we'll gradually improve as we go through the series of webinars over the next few months. To get us started on community-based monitoring, we're looking at two ends of the EIA process, starting at the baseline monitoring stage and also monitoring at the environmental management and monitoring plan stage. In subsequent webinars, we'll be looking at community participation in the meat of the EIA process, from scoping through evaluation of the EIA. The outline of what I'll be talking about today is a little of the context related to EIAs, to talk about the role of environmental management and monitoring plans in EIA, community-based monitoring, looking at some examples, both good and bad, and drawing out some conclusions and recommendations. As I think all of you are probably aware, virtually all countries in Asia and elsewhere require environmental impact assessment. This is generally embedded in national laws, regulations, and mandated procedures. Over time, developing countries, including in the Mekong region, have experimented with various innovations, such as the health impact assessments. But by and large, the EIA process is fairly consistent across countries, starting with the USA about 40 years ago, and therefore lots of experience built up throughout the world in how to make effective EIAs. In Japan, the law requires EIAs for projects such as highways, hydropower projects, railways, nuclear power plants, etc. And some of the recent innovations in Japan are to require a public session at the assessment methodology stage, a very early stage, as well as providing access to information on internal procedures. One of the major advances in incorporation of establishment of primary environmental impact and impact mitigation throughout the process. They have established what is called the primary environmental impact consideration,
and impact mitigation reporting at the end of the process. A few details on those. I won't go through those in detail, but you will have access to the PowerPoint subsequently on both the Mekong Citizen and the AECEN websites. The standard steps of the EIA process are screening, scoping, impact analysis, identifying the mitigation measures, reporting to the Environment Agency, and then the Environment Agency reviewing the EIA, and then once the project comes into to play, there is implementation and monitoring. And what I'm going to focus on today is at the screening stage and the project implementation and monitoring stages. In subsequent webinars, we'll talk about public participation in the scoping, impact analysis, and reporting and evaluation stages. So in relation to baseline monitoring, once a project concept is proposed, the project proponent can begin collecting baseline data on socio-economic and environmental conditions in the project area. And baseline monitoring involving the community is actually a great opportunity for the project proponent to explain the project to the affected community, begin to register any concerns that they may have about the project and its impacts, and feed these concerns into the scoping stage. Modern technology actually provides interesting approaches where this can be done at relatively low cost. In California, some 20,000 kilometers of street views using the Google streetcars have been monitoring baseline air pollution in San Francisco over an extended period, and that's providing really useful real-time data on air pollution hotspots along the routes that the street view cars take. In another example, in Canada, the Clean Annapolis River Project operates the Annapolis River Guardians, which is a volunteer-oriented water quality monitoring program on the Annapolis River. And that's been active since 1992, involves collection of water samples, and is administered by a community-based organization and using volunteers. So the cost is quite inexpensive. Turning to the environmental management and monitoring plan, we've seen that a lot of emphasis is placed on the EIA itself, but rather less attention is paid to the environmental monitoring and management plan. However, that plan is critical as it provides the information that should go into construction contracts and should be instrumental in issuing the operating permit once construction is completed. And it ensures that monitoring will continue right through until the decommissioning stage. You can see that the EMMP is important for not only the construction contracts, but also that feeds into the operating permit and implementation rules, and should lead to monitoring reports that feed into the design of future projects. When we asked practitioners what were some of the common challenges in EIA practice, quite often inadequate management and monitoring plans came out as a specific challenge in most EIA practice. When we looked at that in more detail, some of the reasons were the lack of ownership or commitment of the plans by the project owner, inadequate financing for monitoring in the environmental management and monitoring plans, and inadequate sanctions when the environmental management and monitoring plans were not actually implemented as required. Community-based monitoring should be considered where feasible for a number of reasons, which include the fact that it's economically sound and people will quite often volunteer their services to do this. It's important to build the community partnership with the project proponent and to make the community feel part of the project rather than seeing it as an external intervention. It ensures that local concerns are adequately monitored and not just concerns that the Environment Agency may have. And it provides an educational resource in the local community and helps to build stronger communities, especially where volunteer groups come together and conduct monitoring activities on a regular basis. However, community-based environmental monitoring only makes sense when it gives the community a degree of empowerment. They are unlikely to be interested if they perceive that they are being used by an external party. And while payment for services is probably welcome, it's unlikely to be sufficient for building the kind of community ownership that is intended. However, building a community resource such as a meeting hall or something like that as part of the project design could certainly help to foster that relationship between the project proponent and the community. And ultimately, finding permanent employment opportunities as monitors may be the best outcome that the project proponent can provide. Some of the barriers to community-based monitoring are the lack of technical knowledge in the community, often the negative attitudes of government officials and project proponents to people that they regard as inferior in some way, less educated in some way, and therefore incapable of contributing to the monitoring program. The lack of monitoring equipment and or the operational budget for the equipment. During construction, there is often restricted access to construction sites for occupational health and safety reasons. And often, of course, conflict within the community over the desirability of the project. And you may have some people who are willing to participate in the monitoring program, while others simply want to stop the project from going ahead. While none of these barriers are insurmountable, they do need to be addressed from the outset. So some of the steps in effective community-based monitoring are extensive preparation, explaining the project concept and gaining community acceptance of their role in the monitoring program. Identifying willing and capable participants, including the expected time commitments. Often retired people or school children can actually be involved as they tend to have more time available. There has to be agreement on what kind of compensation or payment arrangements might be provided, and explanation of the overall benefits to the community. There needs to be a timeline established, specific points of contact, coordination mechanisms, equipment provided, and reporting formats agreed. Often there will be a need to conduct a pilot exercise to make sure that the instructions are fully understood by the community and that any conflicts can be avoided. And then monitoring can commence and reports can be prepared. Above all, preparation is critical and needs to be addressed from the outset. There are several good examples of community-based monitoring in the region, and I'm hoping that some of the participants today can tell us more about where community-based monitoring has really worked. One monitoring of industrial wastewater at the industrial zone in Myanmar by Ecolab, which is an NGO, and that has been reported as being a very successful community intervention. A more typical example, however, the Don Sahong hydro, where a very extensive environmental management and monitoring plan in 2013, and it has all of the elements you would expect to find in a good environmental monitoring and management plan. It includes the impact matrix from the EIA report for construction, operation and decommissioning phases of the project. Details are provided on the type of monitoring required, the ambient monitoring, the validation of the monitoring, the effectiveness and compliance of the monitoring, the various sampling parameters, the locations, frequency and timing of monitoring and reporting schedule, the physical, biological and social aspects, and details of the monitoring and reporting requirements are found in an annex. Some of the typical monitoring measures that are proposed include issues like fish catch rates, household fishing effort, successive fish passage improvements, and then staffing are provided to collect this in the unit, and particularly for this kind of hydropower project on the mainstream of the Mekong, long-term fisheries monitoring is needed, and a monitoring team would be established to gather the trends in fish catch over a period of time. While there are provisions for community consultation, there is actually no provision for community-based monitoring, and I think that within a total project cost of around $680 million and about $24 million for environmental management issues, it would be possible to provide maybe $1 million or thereabouts for community-based monitoring. How would I do that? Well, one idea that I think would work quite nicely would be to provide iPads to selected fishing families equipped with images of local fish species, possibly in 3 size classes, and a GPS locator. At the end of each day, fishermen would add a number of each species caught with a simple system to do that, and the number of hours they spent fishing. The project office could then collect and tabulate the results each month and provide payment to the fishing family that provides the necessary information. And over a period of a year or years, these results would clearly show any trends in catch per unit effort, as well as any particular impacts on species that are adversely affected. To interest the families even more, the iPads could be equipped with educational material and games and would ultimately become their property. So, turning to some of the conclusions, we've found that documented EIAs and environmental management plans alone are not sufficient. We also need to ensure that there are compliance and enforcement of environmental protection standards and other regulations. And the kind of monitoring that is proposed would enable inputs into the monitoring of compliance and enforcement of these laws and regulations. Also, we've found that there is a gap that the environmental management monitoring plans are quite often not fully incorporated into construction contracts or operational permits and decommissioning plans. And this is a major weakness within the region. We've also found that community-based monitoring can help to build effective partnerships with project owners. If you look at the news items on the AECEN website under its EIA compendium, you will often see that conflicts are often emerging with the community where environmental impact assessments are being conducted. And so community-based monitoring may be one way of reducing the amount of conflict that occurs during the EIA process. Generally, the results of the monitoring should be made available back to the affected community and other stakeholders. Often the results are kept in a government office or in the project office and not returned back to the affected community. And similarly, the monitoring results should be kept in a database and feed into the design of future projects of a similar nature or in the same area. As I said earlier, communities will only be interested in community-based monitoring if they see that it empowers them to be a part of the decision-making process and that there are specific community benefits. While some community members may be willing to provide voluntary monitoring services, the project proponent should also consider appropriate community compensation or inclusion of community facilities in the project design. And the complementary nature of community-based and more scientific monitoring should be recognized by government agencies without apparent bias for either approach. And the results of all monitoring should be incorporated into government databases on environmental conditions and made available for future projects in the same area or of a similar type. For those of you who are interested in more information on EIA and their application in the region, AECEN has an extensive EIA compendium with news and documents and case studies, and I would hope that many of you will refer to that information on a regular basis. Thank you very much. Okay, now I think we have some of the questions coming up, and I will try to answer those. Okay, the first one, right, from Nguyen Ha from Green ID. Can you help me explain more about conducting a pilot exercise? Okay, a pilot exercise would simply be that the project proponent would work with the community to conduct a pilot monitoring session just to make sure that the community understands how to use any equipment involved or to select particular sampling sites, the importance of going back to the same sampling sites, and giving a little more technical information than the community would normally have at their disposal. It would be essentially a training exercise for the community to make sure that they are fully equipped to carry out monitoring which is verifiable and ultimately accurate. Okay, the next question is again from Green Ideas. When do we start the environment management monitoring plan, and how long is the best plan? Okay, the environmental management monitoring plan is generally attached to the environmental impact assessment, and it should cover not only the construction period, but the operational phase of the project, and even up to the decommissioning phase. Each of those phases has different monitoring requirements. the important thing for the inclusion of the environmental management monitoring plan in other processes shouldn't be underestimated, however. It's important that the monitoring provisions be incorporated into construction contracts so that the contractors are aware of their obligations to ensure that monitoring during the construction phase is undertaken, and for the project proponent during the operational phase of the project. And then finally, when 30 to 40 years down the track, the project may need to be decommissioned, then there is an additional set of monitoring requirements to look at the impacts associated with decommissioning. Okay, another question from Per Se. What is the environmental protection standard? Could you give an example? How do you record, document all data from community-based monitoring? Okay, the environmental protection standards would be the normal environmental standards which the government has for water quality, for air quality, for noise, etc. These standards are basically similar across most countries in the greater Mekong sub-region, and they are available on all of the Environment Agency websites. And recording and documenting the data, I think the example that I gave of providing an iPad to fishing families is a good example of how modern technology can actually be used to do this. It might be something which is on your cell phone, for example, but typically in the past there would have been a notebook or a written record. These days I think it can be done much more real time by providing digital versions and making that available and collated by the Environment Agency or the project proponent using modern technology. Okay, now from SuperKit we have a question about inclusion of community facilities in project design. How can that help community participation or empowerment in monitoring? Here, I think one of the things that I have stressed to the Regional Technical Working Group from the outset is that public participation should be seen not as a burden to the project proponent, but actually an opportunity to build a relationship with the affected community. And that relationship with the affected community may have to go on for 30, 40, 50 years. And so the environmental impact assessment is a great opportunity for the project proponent and the government together to build a better relationship with the affected community. And one way of doing that is when the field inspections are taking place and discussions are taking place with village leaders and community members, you can actually ask what kind of facilities could be incorporated in the project design. For example, you can have a small building which is used for adult education classes, as well as providing the office for the community-based monitoring, where the records are kept or the samples are kept, and so these kind of facilities can be incorporated at relatively low cost in the project design, but help to build a much better relationship with the community. Okay, from I want to know how to link the monitoring with the grievance mechanism, how to solve if we find out something wrong during our monitoring. Yeah, here I think again the relationship between the community and the project proponent becomes very important. Firstly, at the baseline monitoring stage, one of the really useful things that baseline monitoring can provide is to help in the scoping of the EIA. If it is found, for example, that there is mercury contamination in the water, then you can build into the EIA a much more extensive investigation of the sources of that mercury and some potential mitigation measures. If there are specific grievances, then I think the relationship that is built between the project proponent and the community will help to generate a degree of trust between both sides that will help to facilitate discussions and dialogue in a more open and honest way, and this will help to address any of the grievances that the community may feel about the project. Okay, again from Nguyen Ha, you said we can use iPad as equipment for the community to monitor. I want to ask if they have iPad or smart equipment, how can they monitor? Well, this is an idea that I actually picked up from the Eye on Earth summit that I attended a few months ago, where in Africa, Maasai warriors in some of the national parks in Kenya are given an iPad with pictures of the different animals that you would find in the national park. And every time they see a giraffe or a lion, they actually hit the image, and that is given a GPS coordinate, and that information is automatically fed back into the national park database, and they can draw up maps of where all of the animals are within the national park. So this is one way of very simply collecting information in a visual form that doesn't require translation into different languages or anything like that. You just have a picture of the different fish species. Fishermen can recognize the fish from the picture, and then they just put a number below the picture of the fish of how many fish of that type they caught on that particular day. And yeah, a related question from Sochi, monitoring fish using iPads, is it feasible? And I think I gave the example of how it was being used with the Maasai warriors in Kenya, and that's been used now for a number of years and has been extremely successful. Okay, now I think that's all of the written questions that we've had to date, although you can continue to send your written questions. If you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand by hitting the little hand icon, and Socho will give you permission to speak. Okay, come see. I believe we're okay to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Can hear you.
Yes, Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. This is my meeting, and I have some questions to ask you. By the way, I would like to ask you to explain me more about what is the community-based monitoring and who are the community-based monitoring that you refer to. It's like involving the community to participate in the monitoring of EMP. If it involve the community in the monitoring of EMP implementation. So on the slide 8, you said about the barrier. You said lack of equipment for the monitoring. So I would like to ask you that this is the community. They have a limit or lack of equipment for their monitoring. The solution to this could be like providing the equipment and training to the community. My question is that if the community they have the equipment and they conduct the monitoring, will the project proponents will accept the result of the community monitoring, because the community may not be the expert, like for example for water quality or noise monitoring. That is my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. Yes, the community-based monitoring we've been talking about is really at two ends of the EIA process. The first is for baseline monitoring before the EIA is even started. And then the second one is for monitoring of the environmental management monitoring plan. In relation to the equipment, the project proponent can provide the equipment, provide the training, and conduct a pilot exercise to ensure that the community knows how to use the equipment, and the results they get will be accurate. Of course, the project proponent will supplement that information with its own more scientific monitoring systems, and it'll be a combination of both community-based monitoring and monitoring conducted either by the project proponent or by their consultants who are preparing the environmental impact assessment. Wun-Ha, please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to. I have a question about if you said that we can use iPad or smart equipment for community to conduct monitoring. So if in the case they don't have the iPad or smart equipment, how to conduct it?
Yeah, that's why I gave the example of the Don Sahong environmental management monitoring plan, which had actually included a budget of nearly $24 million. Within the budget of $24 million, you can actually provide quite a few iPads to the community as a very small part of that overall cost. And so, you know, for a project that's going to ultimately cost, you know, nearly $700 million or close to $1 billion, providing $1 million to the community for the necessary monitoring equipment is not a major part of the cost. So, Paket, you're on.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Peter, for your presentation, and also say hello to all the audience. Maybe we have quite long experiences about community participation in EIA, EMP monitoring in Thailand. Some failure and some success. So maybe for now, I would like to share 3 short cases. So firstly, is the case about big industrial estate in the north of Thailand that they have problems about wastewater that pollute the local canal and river. After several years of failure in monitoring, then community they came up with an idea. So they raised fish. I'm not sure about the word. I just opened the Google translation, and it's some kind of small fish co-op, maybe. So they raised some fish in front at the point where the industrial estate released the wastewater to the canal, and they raised the fish species that is sensitive to pollution. Every morning they will go and see the fish. If the fish got some problem, then it's the natural indicator that maybe the industrial estate released some wastewater above the standard. So that worked better than several years before of the problems about wastewater to the local canal. Then the second case that may be more advanced is about biomass power plant projects in Thailand. The one main problem is about dust or particulate to surrounding villages. So they want the network of local community, they got together and then they propose to Ministry of the Environment in Thailand that they want the equipment because we got something like provincial environmental center or regional environmental center. So they want the agreement that if they feel that there is a problem about that, they can drive their own car to the environmental center, get the equipment, and then come back to their home and then monitoring the dust or air pollution, and then they got scientific data from the equipment that they borrow from the Ministry of the Environment. But this is not really make good progress yet. Lastly, that I would like to share is just about 2 weeks ago, I was a reviewer of action research project to the Thailand Research Fund, and it's called something like empowering people to be on a scientific aspect, to be like an active citizenship for pollution monitoring in Thailand. So it's a 2-year project that scientists will go to work with some local community in Thailand in polluted area. So they can actually learn how to use both like a simple technique or more advanced tool for monitoring the pollution in their area. It can be pollution on heavy metal from mining, or maybe the volatile organic compound from petrochemical industry. So I am quite excited about this project and hope we can have maybe good and not good lesson to share with you afterward. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kun Supakit. They were all 3 really great examples. Going from really simple things like putting pollution-sensitive fish at the waste outfall, and more complicated ones using more modern equipment. That's great. Thank you. Chocho has reminded me that you should also answer our poll. And there's also a question from Pat, which is the real-time benefit of iPad or other Apple-based products is interesting, considering some rural areas in the region do not have access to internet or even electricity. Yeah, obviously there are certain advantages of using things like iPads or cell phones because you can digitally collect the information. but for 30 or 40 years, community-based monitoring has been done by people entering daily entries into logbooks manually. It's just a pain in the butt to go and collect them and then turn them into sort of database forms subsequently. So if you can collect it digitally initially, that cuts the processing time down to some extent.
The next person is Wong from PAC.
Okay.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Great, Peter, for your presentation. I just go quick with the question go to you, but also to all the participants, because from the last week, last Wednesday meeting with the Myanmar private sector, there raised some interesting question about, for example, one of the things you already raised about the relationship between the proponent and the community. But the thing is also the proponent, the project proponent with the consultants. So far, the thing developed by the EIA consultant, it just go by the EIA consultant. So it doesn't go to the proponent, and proponent doesn't know anything at all. They just, let the thing approved by the authority, and at the end, they don't implement that because they're not aware of that. They don't have any communication with the local stakeholder. So that is one of the key issues they raise. So my question is, what the best way we can promote the proponent to be engaged with the local community and also the consultant in the reason for planning, decision, and monitoring, for example, because so far they developed the plan or the EMP, it's just only the plan, promising plan, it doesn't go beyond that because the implementer, a proponent or proponent will subcontract to order, and then they don't do that because they don't know about what the thing need to be done. And that's my first question. The second question, from the also from the private sector meeting, they said that so far the local people interest only livelihood and money on income, employment, and so on. They don't care about the other environmental matter. So in this regard, they also say that lack of interest, one thing, but the second thing is about their knowledge and skill. And they not really know much about their livelihood and know much beside their local livelihood. So how to promote the community engagement with meaningful of the participation in that planning, decision, and monitoring. You focus on monitoring, but I just want to extend a bit in terms of planning as well. Thank you, Peter. You got my point?
Okay, thanks, Vong. In the years where I was a consultant doing environmental impact assessments, I always regarded my responsibility was to be the bridge between the community and the project proponent, to feed back information from the project to the community, and to feed back concerns from the community to the project proponent. I think part of the problem is that consultants these days are not taking their responsibility to do that kind of mediation role sufficiently, and so this comes back to making sure that the terms of reference for consultants who are doing EIAs include this emphasis on communication with the community, and one of the best ways of doing that is to actually engage with the community to do the community-based monitoring. project that I was involved in Nepal, a hydropower project, I actually paid local people to bring me examples of the fish species they caught each day, and I would take a photo of the fish, pay them a small amount of money for bringing me the species that they caught. And that enabled me to design a fish ladder that was effective for the kinds of species that were found in that particular river. Those sorts of things, I think, are not done very much now by the consultants. They tend to either not have the time or the budget to do that. Secondly, the lack of interest of the community. I would find it very surprised if the community is not aware of their livelihoods. I think they must have a deep understanding of their reliance on their local environment, particularly where they're resource dependent in some way. And we see time and time again conflicts emerging between project proponents, particularly in Myanmar. I have to say, quite a lot of the examples of conflicts between have emerged in Myanmar. And so I think they are very much aware of potential damage to livelihood issues and their natural resources. So important, I believe, project proponents establish with the community, and one of the best ways of doing that is to actually involve them in the environmental community-based monitoring programs. Now I understand we have time for 3 more questions. Okay, we have another written question from Hang from Green ID, asking to explain the project proponent. What we mean by the project proponent is the company or government agency that is proposing to conduct a project in a particular area. Okay. From Mr. Nyi, he says the use of iPad is interesting. Most local people couldn't buy an iPad or iDevice, but most people have access to mobile phones, and 70% of these are smartphones. Is there a good Android app which could download and simply use for community monitoring processes? Maybe some apps in Thai. Just want to know if anyone knows. I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that Thailand has been experimenting with environmental impact assessment documentation on smartphones. So this might be something of particular interest for some of the Thai app developers to think about developing some good air quality or water quality monitoring systems. One that I am aware of in the Philippines, which is an interesting case, is that they have a problem with air pollution from vehicles, with smoke belching vehicles. And so they've developed an app where you can simply take a screenshot of the number plate of the vehicle and the exhaust emissions and send that to the Land Transport Office. And then that leads to a fine for the vehicle owner. Okay, Ms. Lee has 2 questions. At the project preparation step, the community will be asked if they're interested in monitoring. Who will ask? I think it's a combination of both. I think the government officials and the project proponent need to visit the site or project area very early in the process, have discussions with the community, and ask them about any concerns they have, and see if they are willing to participate in community-based monitoring activities. And so getting in at the earliest stage possible with government and project proponent involved. Since environmental officer and monitoring will be selected and carried out after the project has been approved, how can the community be involved at the beginning of EIA report preparation? Well, as I said, if there is a project proposed and the project proponent and the government go out to the project area and have a dialogue with the community, then even before an EIA is commenced, the government and the project proponent can agree to have the community involved in collecting baseline information and providing baseline information that will ultimately feed into the EIA. KMC, you have the last question.
I would like to share some experience from Laos about the public participations in the EIA or in the EMP. Maybe it will help to Myanmar's question. How to involve the community to know about their participation, what we call rights and role in the EIA in Laos. In the first, when we conduct the public participations between the EIA consultant and the communities. So the government, like for example, the government official from Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources and Environment, they will present the public involvement process to the community to make the community aware of what are the process and how the community can involve in each step. Like for example, during the EIA baseline study, during the report preparation, during the report review and approval, and also during the monitorings. For the EIA consultant or project proponents, they have to present what are their projects about and what are the components and how the project will impact to the environment and as well as to their livelihoods. For example, if they build a dam, so one impact will be like create a reservoir. If they create a reservoir, it will flush the areas, will flush the tree, and will make the water's quality is not good, and as well as will flush the land. So they will have like visual aids, for example, they will draw a picture, something like that, to make the community aware of what will be the negative impact from that project and how can the mitigation measure they propose like for those potential impacts. That's what we did in Laos. And another thing is how can we ensure that project proponents aware of their commitment of or aware of what is in the EIA or in the EMP plan. We developed the standard on environmental and social obligations we call CESO, to be part of the concession agreement between the project proponent and the government. So all information from the EIA and from the EMP will be feed into this contract. So the project proponent will know what the EIA consultant put in their EIA and EMP plans. So that's what we did in Laos. I'm not sure this can be example for Myanmar. Thank you.
It's very helpful. Thank you. Okay. Apparently, our time is up. Thank you very much for all of your inputs and questions. We hope that you'll contribute to the which is now open. And that will be very helpful for us to improve on this webinar process. This is pretty much a an experiment from our perspective as well, and I'm sure we can make it even better and more interesting and more interactive in future. But for now, that's all from me, and I look forward to meeting up with all of our regional technical working group members